Lila was a woman of quiet strength, the kind whose spirit could withstand the harshest storms, whose smile still shone despite the weight of her burdens. She met Emmanuel when they were both young, and it was love at first sight. Emmanuel had been kind, full of dreams, and ambitious. They married shortly after, hoping that love would carry them through any hardship that came their way. But life, as it often does, proved more difficult than they could have imagined. The early years of their marriage were filled with struggle. Emmanuel was talented, but luck was not on his side. They lived in a small, run-down house with peeling paint and creaky floors. Every day was a fight for survival. Despite their best efforts, they barely scraped by. Lila gave birth to their first child, a son they named Theology. He came into the world with a loud cry and a strong grasp, and for a moment, Lila believed that everything would be all right, that this new life would bring hope to their struggling household. But soon, a second, third, and fourth child followed, Amina, Joy, and Samuel. Each time she gave birth, Lila felt a deep sense of love, but also an unshakable exhaustion. Emmanuel worked odd jobs, trying to make ends meet, but they often went without enough food to eat, their children clothed in tattered clothes. Lila did everything she could, cooking, cleaning, and caring for the children, but she never complained. She had faith that one day things would improve and that their sacrifices would be worth it. Years passed, and life remained hard. Lila's body grew tired, but her love for Emmanuel and her children never wavered. She was determined to hold their family together, no matter what. One day, a glimmer of hope appeared. Emmanuel came home with news that he had heard about a position at a large firm. It was an opportunity he had dreamed of for years, an opportunity that could change everything for their family. But Emmanuel was hesitant. He had no formal education, no connections, and the job seemed out of reach. But Lila, ever the encourager, believed in him. She pushed him to apply, offering to help him with his resume and even coaching him for the interview. Against all odds, Emmanuel was hired. The job, though entry-level, was a stepping stone, and it allowed him to build a career. For the first time in years, they had enough money to feed their children properly. Lila could finally rest a little, knowing that their future was no longer uncertain. But as Emmanuel's success grew, so did his pride. He became distant, consumed by his newfound status. It wasn't long before he met someone else, Maria, a beautiful, sophisticated woman who worked in the same company. Maria was everything Lila was not: polished, refined, and glamorous. Emmanuel, caught up in the excitement of his new life, began to neglect Lila and their children. One evening, after a long day of work, Emmanuel came home to find Lila waiting for him as usual. She had prepared a simple meal, and the children gathered around the table, eager for his attention. But Emmanuel barely acknowledged them. His mind was elsewhere, and Lila could feel the growing divide between them. It wasn't long before Emmanuel left. He told Lila that he was leaving for good, that he had met someone else, and that he could no longer stay with her. Lila was stunned. She couldn't comprehend the betrayal and its cruelty. After all the years of sacrifice, after the children they had raised together, he was walking away from everything. Emmanuel took nothing but his clothes and his pride. He left Lila and the children in their small, decaying home with nothing but memories and the deep ache of abandonment. He moved in with Maria, and for a while, it seemed like he had everything he had ever wanted: wealth, luxury, and a beautiful woman by his side. But as the years passed, Emmanuel's life began to unravel. Maria, the woman he had chosen over his family, turned out to be just as selfish as he had become. She took everything he had, his money, his possessions, his dignity, and left him with nothing. She disappeared one night without a trace, taking every penny Emmanuel had worked so hard to earn. Now, Emmanuel was alone, his life in shambles. His once promising career was gone, his bank account empty, and his pride shattered. He wandered the streets, a beggar in his own city, his clothes ragged and his face haggard. He had nothing left, not even the family he had once taken for granted. In his desperation, Emmanuel tried to reach out to Lila. He begged for forgiveness, pleading with her to take him back, to let him be part of their lives again. He even visited their old home, but it had long been abandoned, the windows boarded up, the door locked. He tried to contact their children, but they had all moved on with their own lives, their own families. They had forgiven him in their hearts, but they had no desire to take him back into their lives. Lila, too, had moved on. She had built a life for herself and her children. They were happy, though their lives had not been easy. She had never remarried, choosing instead to focus on raising her children to be strong, resilient, and kind. She often thought of Emmanuel, but the pain of his betrayal was too deep. She couldn't forgive him, not for the sake of the past, but for the future of her children. When Emmanuel finally stood before her, a broken man, he pleaded with her one last time. His voice was hoarse, and his eyes were filled with regret. He apologized for everything, the neglect, the abandonment, the hurt he had caused. He said he would do anything to make it right, to be part of their family once more. But Lila only looked at him with sadness in her eyes. She had no anger, no hatred, just a deep, quiet sorrow. She shook her head and whispered, "You had your chance, Emmanuel. You chose your path, and we chose ours. I cannot forgive you. Not for me, not for the children." Emmanuel left her home that day, a man lost to his own mistakes. He wandered the streets, asking anyone who would listen if they knew where his wife and children were. But no one could help him. His pride and his choices had taken everything from him. And so, Emmanuel lived out the rest of his days in solitude, a man who had once had everything but had lost it all through his own folly. Lila, on the other hand, thrived. Her children grew up strong and successful, each one carrying a piece of her resilience and love. They had no room for the man who had betrayed them, but they had learned the value of sacrifice, of family, and of never allowing anyone to take away what was rightfully theirs. The story of Lila and Emmanuel became a tale whispered in the corners of the town, a reminder that love is not just a feeling, but a choice. And that betrayal, once committed, can never be undone.